Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Marian White, and with me is Ken Bialo, who served as mayor in the village of Larchmont for 4 years and trustee on the Larchmont Village Board for 11. Thank you very much, Ken. And then our favorite guest, Mike Weiner, is here. Mike, you were trustee, I believe, for 5 years. You were the fire chief for Village of Larchmont Fire Chief for 3 years, correct?
Yep.
And you were a village volunteer fireman for
100.
100?
For 100 years.
And unfortunately, maybe you got smart, but you're not right in the village of Larchmont anymore, and we miss you. I want you to know that.
Well, we want you to tell us about your experiences in Stanford, and we're going to come to that.
Yes.
This is going to be interesting.
We always start out with feel good, and half the time that means furniture share house. Because it does make us feel good.
And?
Well, November 2nd, which we've talked about on other shows, November 2nd is the gala. And is this the 12th year gala?
No, this is 10 years.
Okay, the 10 year.
The gala's every other year.
Okay. From 6:30 to 9:30, November 2nd, at the Renaissance Hotel in White Plains. What a beautiful place. And what's really exciting to many of us is it's honoring the dear leader and founder and executive director of Furniture Share House, Kate Bialo. So
the dear leader, I love that. Isn't that from North Korea? my dear leader, Kim Young-mung, whatever his name is. The dear leader.
Well,
she is my dear leader for
yes.
sure.
Or boss, whatever.
Well, dictator, basically dictator.
And so I know you're on the board, so you're part of hearing about how things are going.
Yeah.
And what's going on? Is everything a buzz?
Do I have to answer that?
Of course.
No, we don't buzz. Larchmont buzzes.
Well, you're right.
Larchmont buzzes with activity. We don't buzz. They're doing, but everything's fine. And this is probably the major fundraising event for Catherine during her entire tenure, because it's got the retirement, it's got lots of glitz and lots of sponsors and all kinds of stuff. So this will be a good. Hopefully, it will raise enough money to keep the organization running even during the transition period from her retirement to somebody new taking over, which is, and it's not it's not a huge budget, but it's not insignificant. So that's the objective, is to honor her for all of the ridiculous amount of work that she's done over the last 12 years.
And all the meals you've missed.
I never miss a meal. I'm like Mike. Peanut butter and jelly will do for me. I don't care.
Well, it will be such fun to have a night where Kate is the center of attention.
She deserves it.
And is thanked.
My humble opinion.
Yes.
But then she's the center of attention for me all the time. So.
Well, this will be extra special. So, Ken, speaking about buzzing about activity, you found out from a September Larchmont Ledger that the village was spending $2.1 million funded by short-term loans?
I didn't actually find out anything about the streets that have been torn up. Everybody in the village knows the streets have been torn up. They're a mess. They have steel plates all over the place. It's bumpity, bumpity, bumpity from here to there. It's like Weaver Street, where you actually try and drive on the wrong side of the road to avoid the plates beating the hell out of your automobile. And the village has, for the last, 8 weeks? 7, 8 weeks, 6, 8 weeks, something like that?
It's even more.
All right, maybe more, maybe 10, 12 weeks. It's been torn up. And there's construction equipment all over the place. You never know what street is going to be blocked off. You're driving along. You want to make a left turn or a right turn, in this particular case. And you can't, because there's barricades and there's guys working in there. But I'm not complaining about the work. It's just that there was nothing to tell us that this was coming. And that's I have two problems with this. One, this administration or the administrator or the mayor or whoever puts this 18-color brochure pays for it instead of sending something online, right, like any smart person would do.
Right.
Just plucks away at spending money, right? And the headline is buzzing. Oh, it's buzzing. Larchmont is buzzing with that. I don't know what these people are thinking about. But this is, what, 4 sides? Not a freaking word. Not a word about what was coming. This came out in, maybe it was May or June. Not a word about what was coming. And it wasn't until the September issue of the Larchmont Ledger that says there was an August board meeting. At the August board meeting, it was chaired by somebody who was not the mayor. I guess the mayor was away. And the article says there it was, the resolutions were approved to borrow $2.1.5 million to redo water mains. I think I have that right. Linear feet of water main, 2,650 linear feet of water main and 230 water service mains. We didn't do the water service mains unless there was a lead line issue.
Correct.
Right? So but somehow, and I'm just going to say this because I don't really know, somehow I think the administrator has kind of growed the problem. The bigger the problem, the happier he is. But in any event, they contracted for the money. It's over $2 million. They didn't have the money. So but it says here, according to this, is they don't have the money. They were encouraged to apply for an EFC loan, which is up in Albany, which there are lots of entities that apply for EFC loans, and lots of them have much more dire need than we do and are poorer than we are. But somebody told these people at the Village of Larchmont headquarters that they had a good shot because they borrowed the money short term, and they think they're going to finance it with the proceeds of this grant or loan. I remember going into the EFC stuff. We went into it in depth. And all that you could come out of it was that you were going to be way down on the list because you were a prosperous municipality, and there were lots of municipalities all around the state that also had ancient water systems that were going to be applying, and they were going to be ahead of you because they got more points in the scoring. You know, you score the grant, but this grant gets a 10, and this one gets a 14, and the next one gets a 35. So the 10 doesn't get any money, and the 35 gets some, and then the 33 gets some, and so on. So all I remember is we went through this, and we actually had connections to the EFC at that time. George Pataki was the mayor. It was the Republican Party. I was a Republican. It was relatively easy to connect with things that you needed to. And what we found out from the EFC was, forget it. You're a prosperous municipality. We got places upstate that are in desperate need of water mains and other stuff. And you're just not, raise your taxes. So these guys I don't know whether they have a prospect of getting the loan or not, but it seems to me a little adventurous to contract for over $2 million worth of work and not have a serious source of financing. They call it short-term financing here in the article. I don't know what actually happened at the board meeting. I assume that there were at least 3 trustees there. I don't think the trustees had a clue. My guess is the administrator came in and said, we should do this.
Right. Well, how you can do short-term financing with interest rates rising, makes no sense at all.
Well, you'll have to talk to them. But to me, it was, wow, you put this thing out and you don't tell us that our streets are going to be torn up. Everybody's suffering. Seriously. We have friends from Greenwich who came down to dinner one night and they said, what is happening here? It's like bombed out in Berlin. I said, yeah, well, it's, kind of rough. I don't know what they're doing there. We don't know what they're doing. Well, now we know what they're doing. They didn't see fit to tell us in here, but more importantly, they didn't see fit to tell us that they were going on short-term financing for this sort of pretty substantial commitment, $2.1 million commitment. I don't know where they think they're going to get the money from. What their plan B is, as you pointed out, if they don't get either a loan or a grant.
I guess we're sort of on the line, right, as residents?
Yeah, it's us. We pay.
Well, you already spent.
Yeah, we pay.
I think the key is, one of the secondary keys that this shows is whether you have good or bad news, you have to deliver the news. You have to have communications. If you're up front, it makes people's lives a lot simpler. They might not like the message, but at least they can understand and adapt to the message.
Well,
when they don't know, you get uncertainty, and then no one knows how to handle it.
Look, this administration and the one before it and the one before it and the one before it, going back to my last year in office, everything is done behind the scenes. The doors are closed, the curtains are up. They have public meetings once a month. We had public meetings twice a month. Our public meetings were 4 hours. Their public meetings are 45 minutes. All they do is resolve. I resolve this, I resolve that, I resolve this, I adopt the minutes of the last meeting, and we're gone. There's no serious discussion. Until that Preserve Larchmont stuff actually started to get some traction. And then people were meeting separately outside the board meetings, because the board meetings are televised. People are worried about that. They don't want to embarrass themselves. And you think that the board actually knows things, so you don't want to be on the losing end of the knowledge seesaw. But the fact is the board doesn't know anything. The people who know something are the administrator. He are the people.
Well, we had a separate thing as well. And one of the things, in fact, you brought it in as mayor, was we had what we called office hours, remember,
That's right,
on
that's right,
Saturdays.
Saturdays. Oh, God.
So people could come and
Off
ask,
TV.
well, they
Off,
could
right,
come and
not
ask
televised.
questions and try and figure out
What the truth
what was going
Yes,
on.
exactly.
And then they would come back at the board meeting.
Yes. And they say, you told us?
But it started, and the thing was, and I like to say, while the meetings were long,
Yes, they were.
quite often contentious,
Yes, very.
but it got the issues out.
Yeah.
I mean, they were discussed, debated. It was train conversation.
yeah, it was.
It was everyone else's
Cocktail party
conversations.
conversation. It was dinner party conversation. It was, people participated.
People participated in the local government. It was local at its finest. I mean,
I agree.
And it was, I don't want to say because I'm sure I'll get the wrong person, but one of the philosophers says democracy is the most inefficient form of government. What other form is better?
Right.
Well, I don't know whether it was a Greek philosopher who said that, or it was a later philosopher who said that, or it was just a politician who said that.
Whatever.
It is absolutely true.
It was absolutely true. I mean, it's
You're
not
100% right.
It's not efficient, but what I'd like to get back to though is whether you're actually having a formal debate. The key is the communication, so that at least then you can have
Then
the
you're informed
reaction,
in
the
advance.
action, and you can figure out what's going on. You had it when the village hall was being renovated.
The fire department report, remember that?
Oh,
We moved the meetings across Cheryl moved the meeting across the street to the library because there were like 200 people who came.
But it was needed,
Yeah.
and some of the debates were the zoning debates that we had.
Yep.
And some of that was actually very complex stuff, and
It was.
it forced votes to be delayed.
Yep.
I mean, so that other decisions. In fact, it changed a whole bunch of what we did.
But it didn't.
And I think that is, to me, part and parcel what government is, regardless of which side of the aisle you're on. It is, how do you get your message? How do you have a message out? And how do you get everyone to be a participant?
I would just add one thing, because I think we should be talking about Stanford. Enough about this, but the comparison that you can do for us is be valuable to everybody. But there is one thing. When we were, and Cheryl, this was true of Cheryl as well. Cheryl Louis preceded me as mayor. There was a report that was put out quarterly. It was a newsletter from the mayor, and it contained a lot of information. It contained some boilerplate stuff, like how do you apply for a parking permit and other stuff. But there were columns of things that were discussion points of things that were actually happening. And that was 4 times a year. It was done in 2 colors. It was informative and not floozy, A. B, every time there was an election in March, we did, in maybe it was late January or February, we did Plugged In. And sometimes we did Plugged In more than once a year. And Plugged In was the Republican newsletter. And we went into excruciating disclosures about the sewer system issues and the water main issues. And I still have those things. All these issues that if you didn't look at this, you would have actually no idea, even from the mayor's newsletters, which were pretty informative, you would have no idea. And these things were part of our campaign. And I remember afterwards, Ned Benton, who was on the other side of the aisle and ran against us a lot, right? he said to me, those things were killers. So we had to be geared up for this stuff. It was just, it was brutal. You'd come out with all this stuff, and we were nowhere, if we get started. And then we had to, remember they had
heard that.
He said that.
Oh,
He said that
my
to me, and I don't think I'm breaching a confidence by saying it. I mean, he's inactive. I'm inactive. It's all behind us. But I do think that's funny because.
Well, I'm glad it meant something to someone.
Well, you'd write a column, and Kate would write a column, and I'd write a column, and then we'd put somebody else. You wrote column. We put names on it. Who even knew? Charlie Smith. Was there ever a Charlie Smith? Who knew?
Yes, there was.
Anyway, but there was a lot of communication. That's the point. I was reinforcing your
You
point.
just need,
But you should tell us about Stanford because you have taken the big step.
I've moved.
And tell us about the difference.
One of the things that I found, because I was talking about moving for years, all around, because to be quite honest, the cost of living in Larchmont is not light.
Right.
And I was doing that. One of the things I found in Stanford, we sit there and say one of the nice, unique things of Larchmont is our proximity to the city. Stanford's about twice the geographical distance, and it's only 15, 20 minutes longer by train.
On the express train.
By the express trains. And I think the reason I'm bringing this up is looking at the taxes, the cost model, and all this, what would hurt Larchmont would be a drain of people, a net exodus. What's happened with Larchmont for years is a lot, people have wanted to come in at the same rate as people leaving, or even at a slightly higher rate than people leaving, which is what made some of the costs go up.
But it supported home prices.
And it supported home prices, where what I have found, and it was surprising, is the cost of the home acquisition is cheaper, not even 20, 25 minutes further away, but all the other costs come down. And some of this, I was taking a look at some of this and saying, why? Mm-hmm. And then you take a look, and I live in Stanford, much bigger.
100,000 people, 125,000 people.
Political, city. Stanford itself is interesting because it is very diverse from its downtown, and you don't really realize how big it is and how far back it goes and how far up it goes, and some of it's actually bucolic. But what I realized was scale is what changes some of these costs. When they can amortize their police department across 100,000 people, their fire department across 100,000 people, their DPW across 100,000 people, they can do things.
Right.
And they can drive things, which is, and I'm not going to say Stanford's not, Stanford, like any place, has its own issues and its own dynamics.
I think
But
you even said that your car insurance was less.
My car insurance is even less. And what I was looking at was, and it constantly, it always brings me back to the debate, should Larchmont stay independent? And I look at Stanford, and because how many duplicative functions, if Larchmont was just, and I don't want to use the word annexed, merged with the town.
Or submerged.
How many duplicative functions could be eliminated? You don't need 2 administrators. You don't need 2 fire chiefs. You don't need 2 police chiefs. You don't need 2 fire. I mean, quite honestly, you don't need 2 departments. You don't need 2 sets of village halls or town halls. And the reason I find some of this is interesting is how many of the functions the town already does that we don't even realize. I mean, if you need a dog or a wedding permit, God, I have a hard time believing I just put the 2 together. But if you need a
We
permit,
won't tell.
you have to come here. You have to come to the town. You don't even do it at the village.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I bring that up because I think there are some really, and I'm not trying to put a dagger in anything, but I think they're changing times, and I think in order to stay on top, you have to understand what the changes are so you can adapt and then change the direction a little bit for what is it that people want. And one of the reasons I was looking at this, because I love Larchmont. I'm not going to say I didn't. I'm not going to say I don't, still do. But I also look back on how it's changed over the years. Some of it's been for the better. Some of it I actually miss. Larchmont was a much more, and I'm going before the gray hair, was a much more open community. And by that I meant everyone's front door was open. I was thinking today on the train, how many roofs did I put on in Larchmont to help my friends and neighbors? Because a lot of the home ownership was done by the homeowners. It was a different time, a different change. I mean, when I was a child growing up in Larchmont, hard to believe I was ever a child, but it was interesting. All our little league coaches and football coaches, it was predates soccer, were people's dads.
They were when my kids were growing up.
And a lot of the dads
And it's not
could
that
do
way now?
well. A lot of the dads could do a lot of you could have practice at 3:30, 4 in the afternoon, and the reason for it was the trades still lived in Larchmont, and the tradesmen would go to their job at 5:30, 6 in the morning. They were done by 2:33. I mean, the trades start early, and they end early. So we had the tradesmen. A lot of the tradesmen were the coaches.
Yep. It also took some sacrifices from the people who were not tradesmen to just say, I can't do it. I can't do whatever tomorrow afternoon or next week or whatever it is. I have a game or I have a practice, and I got to be out of here at 3:30, which in the time when I was doing that stuff was also, so we had assistant coaches and head coaches, and some would be professionals and some would be tradesmen and other people would be firemen and policemen. There was a big mix of, you had to come to a Little League board meeting to appreciate just how wildly different people were and what they did. But you all managed to get out there in time, to your point.
And some of it was interesting, and I was looking at this is because diversity is always a big conversation. It's been big recently. And I was looking at this because part of diversity is to understand the diversity of employment.
Income levels.
And income and all that. And it's from dealing from a high-end attorney, in a blue chip firm to the tradesman to the emergency service workers to teachers. Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the interesting things, and I was laughing because this was back when my children were in school, very recently, was they got snow days, and I said when I went to school we didn't get very many snow days, and I looked at why. We could walk to school, and the teachers lived in town.
Right.
The teachers don't live here anymore because it'd be very hard to afford it. So, if the teachers have to drive an hour, you have to get them here to have a school.
Right. No,
So
it's the problem of
changes the dynamics. So I was looking at some of this, and some of this is going to be, how do you sit there? What is the dynamic people want in the future?
Well, you vote with your feet, right?
Unfortunately, I did.
Well, but I think that's so interesting, and some of your points that you were making before the show started were the commuting distance is an interesting point.
Well, the
Cost
scale
versus
you did,
distance.
the $10,000 income tax cap
Deduction
certainly
cap, yeah.
is going to.
It's going to change. I mean, we were talking before the show, and property values are no longer going up and that's one of the driving reasons. I mean,
Well, it's not clear exactly. I mean, it's so far. There hasn't been a huge wave yet, right? It's just values are sort of, things aren't selling for what people thought they would be. But that's just because we're all still we don't really know. When we file our 2018 tax returns, then we'll really know how we're affected.
I think that's true probably for every single person. The anticipation is that tax cap for people who are paying $30,000 or $40,000 a year, that's going to have a dramatic effect. But it may not be as dramatic as they think
Well,
it's going
because
to be.
they did lower the top.
They did lower the
individual
top,
tax rate.
and AMT was a backbiter anyway.
Right.
You thought you were the uncle was going to pay 30 or 40% of your tax bill net, but at the end of the day, because you were an AMT, you didn't get to take advantage of the fact that you had high taxes, and in the old days, those taxes would be shared with the feds. So I don't know that people know what the
I
real
just
result
don't
is.
think, yeah, I think the real change will happen, a year from now when people have figured out.
I think that's probably right. And a lot of people will actually come out either even or even better off. I mean, there was a study in the Wall Street Journal which suggested the people who were going to get really clobbered were like,
People in the East and people in the West.
Yes, so they had a big article, and they were talking about, what tax band was going to get clobbered. Low-income people did much better than middle-income people, who did better than high-income people under the new Tax Act. That was what I don't know how they did their analysis. I read the article. I still don't know what the heck it was about. But the headline I took away, it also has this nice little graphs, with the red and the blue and
Yes.
the gray.
Yeah, but I always find it interesting, we think we're patently middle class until you look at how we could stack up against the rest of the country.
Yeah.
And then from an income perspective,
Pretty well.
we are not really middle class. I mean, our cost perspective is so much higher than than a lot of the rest of the country, but our income level also puts us up there. Yeah. And it's hard to, unfortunately, a lot of these regulations like taxes don't take that into account.
Right.
Well, they do for some. They don't for us.
That's what I'm talking
about. They don't for us, but for federal employment purposes, there are boosts.
But going back to something we sort of alluded to is having an administrator,
Yes.
so that the government officials are not really in tune with where each number comes from on the budget. They're just told what to do. That tends to lead to increased spending.
It's
I would say.
directly, you can follow the chart. The budget last year is $19 million for the same 6,500 people. It's actually a different group of 6,500 people, same number. Right?
Same count. The
Same-
population of
same-
Larchmont has not
completely stable.
Has not changed in.
And our first year in 1991, our first year on the board, the budget was, I think, $5.2 million. So it's a 400% increase. And some of that, I have to agree with you, and certainly Mike's right on the scale point. But the addition of this village administrator and all of the replacements that he's done of traditional village workers with his own people, and the new vehicles. I mean, the parking enforcement officers are driving Ford Explorers, a $50,000 car. There's now a pickup truck that says Larchmont Public Safety on it. Well, I'd like to know who's using that. It ain't the police department, and it ain't the fire department. I'm guessing it's the administrator. And we have a boat. What's a boat? What do we have a boat for? A boat at the fire? What is the boat doing there? What do you think you're going to do in a boat?
Well, it's sort of cute if you have a 2-year-old.
Yeah, if you have a big enough bathtub, you put this boat in the bathtub, then it's fun.
Well, we've come to the end of our time. I hope you will be back.
You need to tell us more.
Yes.
You need to tell us more.
We may have a mass movement to Connecticut.
To Stanford.
Well, thank you both, gentlemen, and thank you to the real talent, which is behind the cameras. And take care.
No, have a wonderful Columbus Day holiday.
And remember, November 2nd,
Yes.
FurnitureSharehouse.org.
Gala, yes. Right, November 2nd.